Hello and welcome everybody to the April 5th Legislative Committee meeting. I'll just let everybody know right now that we have two councillors that are zooming in, Councillor Tina Rawala and Councillor Justin Curtis are on the social Zoom platform. Okay, so we'll start with the motion to adopt the agenda. I'll take a motion for that. Councillor Lemko. Is there any additions or deletions? Councillor Bullock?
I'd like to make an addition of talking about legislative agendas. I'd like to talk about that.
Okay. Where are we going to put it? Do you want it, we'll go 10.4? Okay, you want to put it in your roundtable discussion then? That'll be one part of yours then.
I could, yeah.
Oh, okay, sounds good. So, is there anybody else that has any other additions or deletions? Okay, then this is really, will be part of your council presentation, and you'll bring it up then. Okay, all those in favor? Carried, thank you. Next up, adoption of the minutes of our last legislative meeting. Take a motion. Councillor Berry makes the motion. Is there any errors or omissions? Go ahead, Councillor Bullock.
Yes, under 6.1 draft traffic bylaw, the minute notes in there are pretty vague on what we discussed on the traffic bylaw and the last time when we went through this. So I just wondering why they are very vague, because there was quite a bit of discussion on it, so there wasn't much written in the minutes here for anybody who was looking in on it after.
Okay, so you would like to have more captured during the comments that took place during that discussion?
Correct, especially for the amount that was discussed on it.
Okay.
I guess we will be talking about it again today, so.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Bullock. It is fairly brief there. It has been the practice in the past just because there can be extensive discussion that usually the minutes capture decisions that are made. And in this particular instance, there was no decision. But I guess the challenge always is to make sure that we capture what was discussed and make sure that those elements are brought forward. So that is always a challenge. I don't know what the answer is ultimately, but I don't know.
Okay, so this is the first time that we've seen a problem with the minutes. It's just that you feel on this issue that there should have been more of the dialogue between ourselves and Director Rowe that captured. Is that where you're going?
That would be correct.
Okay. And what's standard practice, what we've been doing, so who can fill me in here?
If I may, we are currently in the process of making sure that the agendas are picking up more of the topics, hence you will see the memos to council with the discussion points on there. There is the memo to council that is attached to the agenda, which in turn follows with the minutes. So the items that were discussed were the bullet points were on that memo. So they will be, when it goes to, okay, now how do I say this? It's still always showing on the file, but as part of the agenda. We tend not to capture all the discussion that council has because it goes back and forth. Because then you'll have the, well, Councillor so-and-so would like to see this, Councillor so-and-so would like to see this. Through the discussion, both recommendations were voted down or discussed and no longer. Then it becomes very much a dialogue versus the information following forward, if that makes any sense.
Go ahead, Councillor Berry first.
Thank you, Worship. I know we've had this discussion a couple of times in the past because I've always wanted to see a little more in the minutes, but I do believe that the Municipal Government Act actually specifies that the minutes are just the brief, just the decisions. It's not really meant to capture all of the conversation. But I would like to, if we can keep, and at least if not in the minutes, if we can capture more of what we do discuss.
Go ahead, CAO.
Yeah, thank you, Worship, and through the councillors. Part of the rationale or logic, I guess, for many municipalities across Canada to going to the video systems along with the mics and all the recordings was partially to address that issue, that sort of standard practice, as Councillor Rudick had mentioned. The minutes typically just capture very succinct action items, and councillors, members of the public were like, well, this went on for half an hour. How could there only be one line in the minutes about this? That was one of the major rationales for moving to the video recorded system, so that any member of the public with an internet access and a computer could not only see, and to the legislative coordinator's point, we could go in there and try and capture verbatim the entire half an hour discussion, but the best mechanism for a member of the public to see that would be to just click on the link and go, and then they can see it essentially as it happened and marry that to the minutes. So, trying to put it line by line verbatim in the minutes documents itself would in effect be duplicating what's already available there through the video recording.
Okay, I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, any comments from Councillor Worrell or Councillor Curtis? Go ahead, Councillor Worrell.
Well, I do like, I saw what Sandra was mentioning in the actual traffic bylaw, where when you look at it online as the PDF, there is a yellow sticky next to the portion, and actually when you click on it, I can see the comments that I had made on there and suggestions. So I think that was helpful. That's a good addition.
Okay. So, like CAO Leggett says, I mean, a lot of this is captured on the video of the event, and of course, what Councillor Warwick just said, there is another fallback that we can go to see. So, the theory here is that the public gets to see everything one way or the other. I mean, we couldn't just write out every bit of the conversation in the minutes, and I get it, but if it's being captured and the gist of the conversation is someplace else, and the comments that were made is posted someplace else, I think we'll have to live with that where we're at. So, okay. So with that being said, is there any other errors or omissions within the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. No delegations today. First up, Director Rowe.
Thank you, Worship and Council. You have two documents in front of you with the draft traffic bylaw. Document 1 is a memorandum to Council, and document 2 is the revised and updated traffic bylaw. This is dated April 4th. The memo is just a short update from the March 15th ledge that was presented. Some of the highlights of this draft bylaw: the definition for alley has been removed and replaced by the definition for rear lane, added as subsection 2.45. The term rear lanes will be used to be aligned with the Town of Vegreville's Land Use Bylaw 11/2019, which uses lanes as opposed to alley. Subsection 4.2.10.1 of the Traffic Safety Bylaw will be added to allow the CAO authority to set speed limits in rear lanes. A new clause will be added into Section 7 that sets a reduced speed. Number 4, the definition for demonstration has been added as Section 2.12, and under Section 6, general regulations. Parades has been revised to include demonstrations. Adding demonstrations to this section will prohibit parades and demonstrations' ability to disrupt traffic flows without CAO consent. So after the last meeting, my understanding is some clarity, and there was a couple of words in there that grabbed council's attention, so those were removed. And the way it reads now is for, under section 6, that anyone wishing to hold a demonstration or parade will ultimately provide a permit and a plan to the administration to review, to ensure that traffic flows, the right for people to proceed normally through traffic is not impeded. So this is not anything about stopping parades or demonstrations. It is simply to have some level of control that it does not disrupt the normal traffic flow, because this is a traffic bylaw.
Okay, who has some comments on the changes in this traffic bylaw? Who'd like to start? Councillor Bullock?
Okay, well, when I was reading through demonstration or parade, and I looked at the previous bylaw, and I see demonstration wasn't in there as well. I don't understand why demonstration is a problem in this at all. So according to the last meeting when we sent it back, I thought it was pretty clear on council that we weren't in support of that. Well, that's myself anyways, for sure. So as is written in section 6, I won't be supporting this. Because the parade is no problem, and I don't believe there was a problem with having parades before or anything, but just adding demonstration, I don't see why that's be a big issue. So that's where I'm at on that.
Okay, so Councillor Bullock is against the word demonstration in here, so like the bylaw is trying to protect the rights of somebody during a demonstration. I think that's where we're trying to get to here. Is that is what the gist of the demonstration part is?
Yes, that's correct.
We're not asking people not to have demonstrations.
No.
As long as they're peaceful demonstrations.
Yes, and according to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we cannot stop peaceful process. That's people's ultimate right. What this was giving us was just some element of control that when a parade or a protest is taking place, that we know time limits, we know what specific areas, so that it doesn't hinder people's ability to travel freely within the community, and that we can put things in place. And that might mean simply, putting up barricades and, having, letting businesses know that this is going to be happening on this, in this section, so that everybody is working collaboratively to allow a parade or a demonstration to happen.
So in theory, if somebody was to apply for a permit for a demonstration, a peaceful demonstration, and then we would know how long the demonstration was gonna take place, if they were impeding traffic flow or the access to people's businesses or their other rights, then this bylaw would then kick in. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, I'm going to echo Councillor Bullock's concern about the word demonstration. I do not really actually see why the word demonstration has to be spelled out and defined. As the term parade actually is defined, it actually has an added clause to it, or promote a cause or purpose. That in itself right there is sufficient. If a person actually is looking at having a parade, whether it's a demonstration or not, if they're looking at having a parade for any cause or purpose, then they have to get the permit for that. Why we have to spell out the word demonstration and signify its negativity, I do not understand, nor do I understand why we have to take under the fines in Schedule A, say, a demonstration or parade without permission, because the demonstration, when we're talking about a roadway, which is what we're talking about under the Traffic Safety Act, is a roadway, it's spelled out under parade. So I don't know why we have to have the word demonstration in there. Thank you.
Just a second. Councillor Curtis, is your hand up? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as the other two counselors, like, requesting a 14-day, previous to when the demonstration is gonna start at the parade, permitting required, paying fees and stuff. I mean, I'm not for this. Like, out of the highlights, the first 3 bullets that deal with the speeding in the back alleys, that's where I'm at. And anything below that, I'm not for.
Okay. Councillor Lemko.
I as well don't agree with the demonstration clause that's been proposed. I think the echoes of the other councillors, I can't support this. I believe we've been able to manage quite well for now with parades and such, but to give 14 days for people to assemble in case of good cause, and to get written permission from the fire chief and the RCMP is kind of taking that ability of those people to actually do that. I don't see a problem in the community, so I can't support the demonstration portion.
Okay, is there any other comments from councillors? Okay, Councillor Warba, then we'll go back to CAO after the comments from councillor.
Okay, so I just want to start by saying that I appreciate that a lot of the concerns that I had raised before were addressed as far as, legalities and what we can do. So I definitely do appreciate that I see those things that I brought up last time were addressed. For me, I still don't feel that this is something that as council we asked for or prioritized. And I think we did have a discussion about if we were wanting this, it might be where we're sitting down and having a longer discussion about the reasons for and whatnot. So for me, I still don't see that we ever indicated wanting anything in regards to demonstrations, so I wouldn't be in support.
Okay, Councillor Rudick.
I just have 2 questions. I think it's quite clear that this is maybe a little bit different than what council was expecting when we were asking for some of the changes to the traffic safety bylaw, and I understand that there are other considerations when you open up a bylaw that need to be discussed. My first question is something like Terry Fox Walk that incorporates all the 4 schools around the community, for example. By this definition, they would also be considered a demonstration, and I'm not sure that that's what that is. And it's not really a parade. It's neither a parade nor a demonstration, but in each instance, every year, the schools notify Public Works and they notify the RCMP to ensure that they're safe as they move around the community. So my first question would be, in that specific example, it doesn't fit into either definition, I don't think. And then my second question is it possible for us to just remove that portion that's contentious and keep the rest of it in its entirety and just take that portion out?
Okay, go ahead, CAO.
Yep, thank you, Your Worship. So perhaps to answer the Councillor Rudick's questions, that yes, it is possible to take that out. But as you'd mentioned with any bylaw, there was directive to rewrite this particular bylaw for a couple of specific things. But when staff undertake the rewriting of a bylaw, we don't just look at that one thing. We sort of go through it and say, well, because it's coming before council and it's a complete rewrite project, is there anything else that we think could be beneficial to the community that now's the opportunity to put in this bylaw to prevent it to having coming back for 6 months from now or so on and so forth. So one of the things was the idea of putting some general guidelines around protests and demonstrations, partly fueled by some of the things we've seen recently, play out in the media around various events. And I'd like to say that, bylaw writing is one of those difficult tasks assigned to staff by council. In a perfect world, council, would draft your own bylaw, proofread it, approve it, because it very much is your document. There's no such thing as a staff bylaw per se. And in doing so, we're delegated the authority of writing it on your behalf. And I can speak for all municipal employees when I say we do the best to our ability to do that, as good as we can. But as you can imagine, trying to put someone else's intentions down on paper is not an easy task. And we try to draft bylaws in a way that we feel best captures what we think would be acceptable to you while trying to balance out our professional opinions with your need to maintain law and order in the community. And it is due to that imperfect process that the requirement to bring it back for multiple readings exists. So any bylaw within the town of Vegreville passes through no less than 4 opportunities for review and alteration. And because of this process, it's here to ensure that our version of it is accurate and acceptable to you guys at the time it's passed. Secondly, I do want to state emphatically, for the record, that at no time was any of the proposed language in either the first draft or this next draft intended to infringe on the charter right to peaceful protest in any way whatsoever. That wasn't what we were looking at doing. And despite what is playing out on social media, I want to assure council and the public that that is not the case. In fact, it's the polar opposite. And we were intending to create language to ensure that the town can work collaboratively with individuals and groups looking to demonstrate. Interestingly, despite what I understand is heavy debate and some inaccurate information on social media, not a single member of the public has reached out to my office to ask about this particular language. And that concerns me a little bit, partly because I consider myself, open to discussion. And I fully uphold the right to democracy as a Canadian, and I consider myself approachable. And if they would, I would have gladly devoted whatever time necessary to help them understand 2 things. 1, the language around protests, demonstrations, and parades in the bylaw is just proposed. And until you guys accept it, it's basically just words on paper, right? Number 2, the role of the municipality is to govern for the greater good. And we're attempting to give council and the public an opportunity to collaborate on protests and demonstrations to ensure that we're working together to make any public event as safe and as risk-free as possible. Because increasingly, protesters are using tactics that are designed to be disruptive in an effort to force their message across. And we're seeing that playing out in the media. So, and those tactics can have a large-scale community-wide effect. Our proposed bylaw language is meant to try and balance, through discussion and working together, 2 competing priorities. 1, the charter right to peaceful protest, but also 2, the charter right to free and unobstructed movement. And I, for one, believe that there's a big difference between standing on a sidewalk, waving at cars with a sign professing your cause, versus painting that cause on your chest and laying down on the road and blocking traffic. And that's what we were trying to get at with the traffic bylaw. So we're hoping to provide council some language that says one is okay, but essentially the other is not. And the draft that is in front of you is intended to try and put some guidelines around that. Now, having said that, we can strike it and we could look at creating a separate bylaw. But in this day and age where tactics are becoming increasingly forceful, I think it's important for the municipality to consider it in some capacity. Perhaps not in the traffic bylaw, but, we live in a day and age of bridge blockades and road blockades and all kinds of that stuff. And is that the look and feel we want for the town?
Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate your candor in there. I know there was a lot of discussion in our community about our last go-around, and a lot of stuff was taken out of context. The council sent that portion of the bylaw back to be redrafted or taken out, and I know there was some discussion that was, like I said, taken out of context, that we were in favor of going ahead and abolishing the right for protesting and demonstrating in town, and again, that was not true, and I feel that the community should know that. I know a lot of councillors were reached out to and stuff about some, I'll say, not quite the truths, but if you want to know what's going on in council, and I'll tell this to all citizens, you should find out from a councillor themselves and don't get your information from social media sites. So if you want to know who has their eye on Vegreville, It's us in this room, that's who does, so. Councillor Barry?
Thank you, Your Worship. And to CAO Leggett, I appreciate the explanation that you provided, and I understand where administration was coming from. The situation is that bylaws establish policy. And at no time prior to the bylaw coming to us did we discuss policy as a council concerning demonstrations. We discussed a speed limit in the rear lanes and suggested that the bylaw needed to be changed so that we could do so in order to have safety in the back alleys. But at no time did we discuss that we were willing to look at a change in policy when it came to demonstrations. And I think that is the failure of when suddenly a bylaw comes to us and we have to take a look as to what all changes were in that bylaw and decipher for ourselves as to whether we're agreeing with that policy or not. And to me, it starts to sound like administration is trying to develop policy. So I think what we need to do is keep those things clear. I appreciate a good discussion about policy, but I'd like to have it about that policy, not whether I agree with the rewrite of a bylaw. So I think what we need to do is clear this and work together, and I think that that can be done very easily. Thank you.
Okay, so, go ahead, Councillor Rudick.
I know that this is a different question on a different section of this, so I don't know if we want to conclude this portion of the discussion, or is it okay if I ask a question, or we would like to close the discussion on this portion?
Well, it's all in the same bylaw, so we can keep talking about it as long as you'd like.
Not to draw it out, and I apologize to the Community Services Director for not catching this previously. It is 9.3, and I believe Councillor Lemko asked last time about bicycles on sidewalks, and I just want to ask again, because we do have several walkways that are considered, in my opinion, I mean, I ride on them quite frequently, that would be considered a sidewalk, and it says that only 12 years and younger. I'm certainly not in that category, as many other community members are not, would not be riding on this sidewalk. So just, I don't know how we capture that, and if we want to clarify, I mean, I guess we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, no different than we're talking about parade versus demonstration. But for example, some of our walkways, and I believe the example was 47th Street, or is that the one that you used that's along the Canets Park, would be one of those walkways that is frequently used by adults on bicycles. So again, I don't want to suggest that this is going to be something that's going to be enforced, but again, it leaves that gray area right here. This is a specific example again.
Okay. And any comment on that part of the bylaw? Basically, it says if you're over 12, you're not allowed to ride your bicycle on the sidewalk.
And that is correct. You should, the premise was that you would use the roadway.
And some of the sidewalk that we use, that we identify as a walking path, doesn't become a path to ride a bicycle on if you're over 12. You still should ride it. That's where we're going. Is that what you were getting at?
I guess so, and maybe it would just be common sense that we're going to use to apply. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that it's different to ride a bicycle on a sidewalk downtown, for example, but if you're on 47th Street as a parent with a young child, expecting you to ride several meters away and quite a distance away from a young child, for example, would be perhaps unreasonable.
So, and to answer that, in the Parks and Open Spaces bylaw that will be presented to council, it's identified in there that walking paths are not considered sidewalks. So in the walking paths, bicycles are allowed, and that bicycles will give right of way to pedestrian traffic. So this is just municipal sidewalks we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay, so to move forward, Counselor Rowe or Curtis, do you have any more discussion?
No, I'm just looking to see where we're going from here, so.
So we're gonna send this back for a rewrite and take out, the demonstration portion? Go ahead, Chris.
I was just gonna, thank you, Worship, I was just gonna confirm, is it council's direction to bring it back minus section 6 in its entirety for the next council meeting?
Is there anybody opposed? Well, go ahead, Counselor Lamco.
I certainly wasn't opposed to the parade portion. It's a demonstration portion that I was opposed to. Parades was in the old bylaw and it worked quite well. But it's now, the demonstration's been added, so I don't support demonstrations. Parades can stay.
Counselor Berry?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just skimming here very quickly over section 6. Throughout the entire bylaw, again, I believe that the definition for demonstration, and each time the word demonstration appears throughout, including the fines, if only that word was removed, I think it would be back to where we're just talking about parades. And again, as I said, with the definition of parade being slightly modified, if there is a situation where it is recognized as being an inappropriate parade, that permit could be refused. I mean, it does say the parade is talking about or promote a cause or purpose. So I think that would be sufficient language for myself to say that there's latitude there if there is something that needs to be considered in the future. So if just removing the word demonstration, in my opinion, which is a negative term, would satisfy myself. Thank you.
Go ahead, CAO.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. That does leave a little bit of confusion in my mind, and I can't speak for Director Rowe, but, you know, let's say somebody wanted to host a pride parade in town, for example. Worthy cause, somebody comes in, we discuss it, we set the you know, the rules, the boundaries, here's the streets, we'll do all of that stuff. Would something like a pipeline protest be considered a parade?
What do we have right now in our traffic bylaw, our traffic safety bylaw, that would, let's just say someone showed up at Main Street and decided that they were gonna have a protest and they were gonna sit there for a month? Is there anything that is there any legal challenges under our municipal bylaws that we could remove them, have them stop, tell them to get out of the way of everybody else's rights? So right now we have nothing, is what we're saying.
As far as we can tell, Your Worship, yep.
So
We could have 3,000 people from Edmonton come in tomorrow, install themselves on 4 blocks of Mazankowski Way and prevent every citizen from accessing banks, insurance companies, and the dental offices until their message was heard.
So, is everybody okay with just flying without anything? I mean, I guess if that was to happen, we could rush in some sort of bylaw at the time. I mean, I see the point where admin is going. I mean, the way that today's world is changing. I mean, it is what it is, but right now, we've had it this long just under a parade issue. We've never had the word demonstration in there. But if it comes to that, we have no actual law to remove them, or to actually fine them, I guess is what we're looking at. We could never fine them. Go ahead.
And I'd like to respectfully suggest, Your Worship, it wouldn't even be a question of fining them. Part of the logic behind the wording in the bylaw, or looking for it, would be to allow myself and other municipal professionals to have a conversation with the leaders of that organization to say, okay, you're interested in the 4 blocks of downtown, and you want to block it off, you're intent on doing that, on getting your message across. We've got a competing priority to ensure that the businesses and residents are unaffected of this. So can I negotiate that we block off 1 lane for you, and your protest and your activities take place on one side, that at least allows me the opportunity to ensure my residents can still access the banks and the insurance companies and their other essential services. And what's your time frame? To your point, are you guys talking 3 days? Or are you talking half a day? Because there's a big difference between shutting down, you know, the downtown core for half a day versus a month. You know, and all the stuff that can come along with this, you know, and we're seeing protest activity in the news where people are chaining themselves to vehicles and light posts and all of that stuff. And the question is that something that the municipality feels, you know, because we control the activities on our streets within our boundaries, should we have some rules around that? And like I'd mentioned before, my personal view on it is there's a big difference between somebody peacefully standing on the side of the road with a sign with a message on it, waving at vehicles to get support, versus painting that message on their chest and lying in the street until somebody forcibly removes them.
Okay, so I really don't see a lot of will of council right now, to use anything to do with a demonstration. So, I mean, it's just, the word that's not gonna fly here, so looks like if you wanna pass this, you'll have to take the whole section right out of there, so.
We're happy to do that if that's council's
Okay.
wish. Yeah.
So the whole section or just remove demonstration?
Well, if you take the word demonstration out, what do you have left? I mean, you just wanna apply it just to parades? I mean, we don't have a problem with parades blocking businesses and stopping the flow of people, everyday people. Councillor Bullock.
I'd say just take it all out, and we haven't had a problem in the past. So, and I just don't see a community of this size having that problem. I don't see it. I don't think that people in this area have really pushed anything to that point or wanted to even. So I guess I go out on a limb and say I think it's just more of a big city problem than anything, but around here I just don't see that.
Okay, well, we're gonna limit the discussion on this. I think we've beat this up enough, that there's no will of council to support anything to do with demonstrations right now. I think that if we were to have a policy discussion about this, and I'm sure that there's a few people on council here that would like to see us a little more protected in bylaws for situations that are more uncommon than they ever were before. I mean, to do no planning is never good. So, but for now, this is where we're gonna leave it. We've discussed this enough. I think in the future that it'll probably come back up again, and we'll probably have some discussion on some policy around how we can protect the citizens and the businesses of our community against something like this. Are you two okay with that, Councillor Warwick and Councillor Curtis? Excellent, so that's where we'll go with that. Thank you. Next up is the, sorry?
Sorry, Your Worship, just to confirm, section 6, strike it in its entirety. Very good. Yep.
We're not gonna try to reword something.
Yeah, duly noted. Okay, thanks,
Okay.
folks.
Next up is the draft responsible pet owners bylaw. Go ahead, Director Rowe.
Thank you,
Oh,
Worship.
Sorry, one quick thing. When we say we're striking section 6, I assume we're saying we're putting section 6 back to its original form prior to these changes, not removing section 6 in its entirety.
I don't have the original here. What was section 6 originally?
Parades.
Parades.
Okay. Sorry. Okay,
I just want to make sure that's clear before all of a sudden we go from 5 to 7.
Yeah, Your Worship, Councillor Lemko has the original bylaw here from 2017. And yeah, section 6 only deals with parades, but essentially appears to put the same sort of parameters on it that the parade organizer has to talk to the town before setting it up, and a little bit easier to manage, right? Its parades tend to be for a shorter time frame. They come and go, and not a lot of parades have the potential to turn into vandalism and looting, but
okay,
yeah.
so there'll be a little reorg on what numbers will be what, because we added another section, so it'll change, and we'll make the changes to respect what the will of council is here. Okay? So the section that dealt with demonstrations will be removed altogether, and the word demonstration will be taken out of the ledger at the start, so. Is everybody good with that? Okay, thank you. Carry on, Director Rowe.
Thank you, Worship. This is the responsible pet ownership bylaw draft. There is 3 documents, I think, or 2 documents attached to this one, 2. Again, a memo and the actual draft bylaw. I'll go through the administrative comments on the memo. In August 2020, bylaw XX 2020 dog bylaw was initially presented for information to council and discussion. In January 2022, complaints regarding nuisance cats and harboring of cats was brought forth to council. After council consensus, in lieu of presenting an updated dog bylaw and developing a separate cat bylaw, the Responsible Pet Ownership, or RPO bylaw, was developed from research and consultation with several Alberta communities. What is the true purpose of this bylaw? The bylaw is about responsible pet ownership and helps us work with pet owners to ensure that pets live safely and in harmony with their neighbors and owners. This bylaw is not penalizing responsible pet owners, but encouraging responsible ownership for the safety and welfare of animals in our community. The penalization is for those pet owners who are not responsible for their animals and creates unnecessary duties for both animal control and our partner organization, Prairie Tails Animal Rescue Society. The town of Vegreville advocates for responsible pet ownership through 4 principles: license and provide permanent identification for cats and dogs, spay or neuter cats and dogs, provide proper physical care and socialization for cats and dogs, do not allow pets to become a threat or nuisance in the community. Other RPO bylaws have included sections for controlling animals like bees, pigeons, prohibited animals, livestock, and wildlife. We have not included these sections in our bylaw at this time, but all sections are open for council discussion to limit the possibilities of this happening in the community and having to deal with the concerns if and when they arise. So example, goats, sheep. If the draft bylaw is approved by council, bylaw 0495 nuisance animal and 0798 dog bylaw would be repealed, as they are all combined into the responsible pet ownership bylaw. This bylaw, once approved, will be accompanied by an online presence, printed brochures for better understanding of responsible pet ownership. Some of the key changes that are identified from the dog bylaw 0495. The maximum number of animals per household. The maximum number of animals owned in one household will be 2 dogs or 3 cats. Should have a resident have more than 2 dogs or 3 cats, they may apply for an over-limit permit per animal in excess to explain the reasoning behind the additional pets. Clearly defined expectations for responsible pet owners. The offenses have been more clearly defined, and the addition of the following: leaving animals in vehicles unattended, specifically during hot or cold temperatures, leaving animals unprotected in the back of trucks, not providing adequate care, food, water, shelter, medical attention for a pet. Rules regarding the DOLA, which is the dog off-leash area, have been added. These rules are in place for the health and safety of all dogs and their owners and handlers. Pet registration. Pet owners will now have the ability to register their cat or dog online. The town of Vegreville will issue licenses for dogs that are altered and unaltered, optional cats, altered and unaltered, nuisance animals, and restricted animals. All dogs over age of 6 months must be licensed within the town of Vegreville. Cats over the age of 6 months may be licensed by the choice of the owner. Licensing for cats is no longer optional if that cat has been seized or impounded and deemed a nuisance animal. The owner of a seized cat will need to license that cat before they may reclaim their pet. Increased and clear defined rules regarding nuisance and restricted animals. This section is regarding defining and deeming an animal nuisance and or restricted, also giving municipal enforcement, animal control, increased powers to deal with them legally. If an animal is declared nuisance or restricted, The current animal license is rendered void, and the owner will need to apply for a new license as a nuisance or restricted animal. The responsible pet ownership bylaw clearly outlines what defines a nuisance animal versus restricted animal. It clearly outlines the rules and authorities regarding seizure of a dog by a peace officer or animal control officer. Provisions for registered Canadian service dogs. Service dogs was not a part of bylaw 0495. Animals at large, residents may request a trap from a peace officer or animal control officer to humanely capture cats and dogs. Captured animals must be supplied with basic necessities and must be surrendered to a peace officer immediately. Increased penalties section. The penalties have been adjusted to be consistent with other bylaws throughout the province.
Okay. So there's the highlight of the changes. And the name of the bylaw has been changed as well. So this is what, the third time we've seen this with the changes?
Second.
Second? Okay. Who wants to start? Okay. Councilor Berry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we have gone through a number of memos and et cetera discussing this, but in asking the director, a couple of communications that we had, you indicated to me that things had already been changed, and yet in this bylaw, I see they have not been changed. So I have tried to refresh a number of times, but it still comes up. The concern I had was 8.19. Incorrectly references subsection 8.16 when it should be referencing 8.17. And in your memo yesterday, you told me that change had already been made.
And yet, sorry, that maybe this one was the wrong copy sent. That is my error.
Yeah, I'm just
that-
wanting to
okay.
just make sure
So
that I
that has
don't
been
just
changed.
assume that you've
Yes.
made the changes and it's the wrong copy and I let it go by. And the other discussion that we had was concerning the discrepancy or the contradiction. An officer has to be granted a power before it can be given a responsibility. And in 815, what it's speaking of there is the steps or the responsibilities of a peace officer. But under the term reasonable time, he doesn't have any discretionary because reasonable time is actually spelled out in 817 as being 3 days or 5 days, depending on whether it's tagged or not tagged. And in that statement, it says that it must be held at an animal shelter for those periods of time. And I had requested that 817 simply be reworded to say, subject to 815C, and then the remainder of it, which then means that if the animal is ill, diseased, injured, or unhealthy, the peace officer now has the discretion of stating the reasonable time, and instead of waiting for 3 days, he can take him immediately to a veterinarian. And I thought on the phone yesterday I had clarified that in asking for that change.
And I apologize, that has been changed. I'm
Okay.
actually trying to see if we can get the proper copy. So that's my error.
Those are the only concerns that I had at that point, was just in order for an officer to actually have the discretionary time, then he can't be bound by 817, which clearly refers to an animal. It does not spell out whether it's healthy or ill or tagged or not tagged. I mean, the aspect is talking that an animal must be held at a shelter for 3 days or 5 days. And there's going to be situations where 15C is going to be important if the officer picks up an injured animal and has to make the decision at that point in time to get it to a vet. So that's the reason that I wanted to make sure that there wasn't ambiguity there.
So Director Rowe,
Thank
do
you.
you feel comfortable that those two changes have been made in the latest version of this responsible pet owner bylaw?
They have, your worship. Actually, I'm having the updated copy sent to Sandra so that we could distribute it to council. So again, my apologies.
Okay, and that's understandable.
Okay,
What
I
happens.
accept that, and I didn't want to make a big issue of it, because we had a lot of conversation about a lot of different things. And yes, things fall through cracks, but I didn't want to just assume and then discover later. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Riddick.
Again, I apologize that this wasn't sent to you by email beforehand. I wanted to go to the section 4.5 about the limits on cats and dogs, and this is an older conversation that goes back to our first conversations, I guess back in 2020, so that's a long time ago. I wonder if you could explain the reason for the number that was chosen, 2 dogs or 3 cats being the maximum that's permitted, and then the allowance that there could be an over limit permit issued and so on. I'm just wondering if there could be a little bit of an explanation of the reasoning behind that.
Thanks, Councillor Rudick. So back in 2020, when the updated or the revised dog bylaw was brought forth, one of the questions to council was putting a limit on the amount of dogs. Cats was never a part of it. It was simply dogs. And based on averages across the province, it was 2 or 3, and council had set the direction as 2 dogs.
Go ahead.
So with full disclosure, I have 2 dogs. So that isn't weighing in my conversation, but I am curious, again, what the process will be, because there are a number of people that have more animals than 2 dogs and 3 cats. I'm not suggesting, and I realize that that was a conversation from a previous council, so we've got 2 new councillors here that may not have been aware of that, except when this bylaw came forward, and I'm not suggesting that that's the correct number. I'm just curious that this might add another process that maybe is unnecessary. Maybe it's a red tape addition in terms of getting another permit, and we're not talking about a certain size of dog, or certainly I'm not endorsing the cat hoards that some people have unintentionally purchased. When they purchased a home, they got an additional 30 feral cats with their purchase. But I'm not sure that this number is the right number.
So, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I can confirm too that, that number of 2 dogs and 3 cats is fairly common across a number of municipal bylaws, both in Alberta and British Columbia. In fact, my last municipality, we had the exact same thing. When that discussion kind of took place, one of the consideration factors was an individual's ability to care for that many animals. So really, in essence, this says you can have 2 dogs and 3 cats in your house at the same time. So 5 animals under your care. Expanding that, adds layers of care. One of the other considerations with the dogs was that dogs are required to be on a leash or under the owner's control, at all times whenever they're out of the house. And individuals who have more than 2 dogs often have a tough time keeping 3, 4 dogs on a leash under control, trying to take the dogs for a walk down the street. There are ways to manage around that, of course, but it was basically that was a reasonable number. And then part of the special application was to permit somebody to come in and say, well, look, I've got 2 dogs, but they're small little Yorkshire Terriers. I can easily walk them on a leash. Can I get a special permit for a 3rd one? Okay, seems reasonable. Versus somebody, I have 2 massive pit bulls and I'd like a 3rd, and no problem. I'm going to have no problem preventing them from dragging me down the road. Or when they decide to get aggressive towards it, we might not entertain that 3rd one in that case, right? And then, like I say, just to also simply be sort of conscious of the number of animals that could be under one potential household. As it's written here, we're actually talking 5 animals under the care of a single household, so that's getting up there.
Seems like quite a bit. Director Rowe.
So go back to Councillor Rudick with the red tape, and we're trying to streamline the process by making it online for registration, and it even the over limit fee, yes, it's an additional fee, but our whole idea is to try and streamline this process with online rather than the paper versions.
Well, I appreciate we need to put some limits on it for sure. And there gives us the ability to issue a special permit if it's something that looks like it's feasible, it can work in that household. I mean, I get that, so, Councillor Curtis.
I'm usually not nitpicky, but I'm gonna be a little bit on this one. 4.5, should it read no more than 2 dogs and or 3 cats? This is kind of the way I read it now. You can have 2 dogs, or you can have 3 cats. You can have a mixture of both animals.
Or camel.
Or, yeah, 3
Or
camels.
Sorry,
We're not addressing camels in this one.
it is in the preamble.
It is, but we'll get to camels later. Okay, so that's another change that needs to be made. And/or. Right?
Yep, I will make that change.
So these changes in this bylaw that have been asked to be made, and you're sure that there's 2 that Councillor Berry had asked for will be in, and that change, oh, sorry, Councillor Warwa, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, this isn't directly in regards to bylaw change. I just wanted to ask about implementing a bylaw like this. With, if we had a list of permits, is that something that part of the intention would be that if we were in a situation of there being an emergency situation, that we would pull the permits to see the type of animals in there? Is that also part of the intention, or it's more solely just on dealing with the nuisance side? Just asking because I had heard in some communities where they were able to pull up to know if there was animals also within a house. So I was just wondering if that was the intention as well.
Okay, CAO.
Yeah, thank you, Worship, and through to Councillor Worrell. Yes, that is one of the benefits of the permitting process, that if ever we need to conduct any enforcement action or anything like that, or there's a report of a vicious dog, we can pull up, you know, the information of the permits in place in that household and see who's got what and where, so.
Okay, Director Rowe.
So just to further that, currently we have, I believe, 7 binders for dog licenses. So when dog licenses are updated, we have to update 7 binders for the municipal enforcement, animal control, public works, the administration office. So the intent is with the online is that everybody will be able to have online access to a spreadsheet that is current with every license that is purchased, so that it'll come onto a spreadsheet, and then everyone will see exactly what's current, and eliminate the need for binders. They'll be able to just search on the sheet an address, a dog tag name. It'll be very, very much streamlined, as opposed to going and changing every binder every time there's dog licenses. So this will also give us the ability to contact owners that don't pay their dog tags on time. Right, and the way it sits right now is once the deadline has passed, we have to spend administration time phoning all these dog owners, animal owners, and remind them to pay their license, their license fee or their tag fee. And occasionally we come across, you know, the animal has passed away or people have moved. So it's a challenge because we have to try and get a hold of all these owners. So this will streamline the process a lot.
Okay, so if everybody's happy with the changes that are in the new one that Councillor Berry talked about, we move the amount of dogs and cats to and/or, that this will come back to Monday's meeting for approval. Everybody's good with that? Okay. Hold it. Sandra, what?
Through to CAO Leggett, do we want to present this on Monday with an RCD for the first reading, or all 3 readings?
What's
Because one item that I guess I'm looking for some direction from council is, do you want us to add wildlife animals? Do we want to go near sheep or goats or potbelly pigs? Like,
chickens?
Wow. Go ahead, Counselor Bullock.
No, I don't think we want, well, I don't want to go to that at this point. I think what you have done here and what you were asked to go do, was something that wasn't flavor earlier to go on and revisit, but I think for the most part, it's been handled pretty good. It gives everybody, avenue in case they have a complaint and how it's gonna be dealt with. I think it's actually fairly sound with the changes going in, and I think that's as far as we need to go at this point.
Is there anybody that wants to bring any more complications into this bylaw? Seeing none at this time, so we will go for the 3 readings on Monday. Is anybody opposed to that? Okay, that's where the direction will go. Thank you. Director Rowe, the Green Light Program. Sorry, Sandra.
Just for council's information, if you, I have loaded I've sent the proper version. It's now loaded if you want to read it afterwards.
Do you have and/or in there?
No, sorry, I didn't make that change that quickly.
Okay, but I'm sure that Councilor Berry will
I'm
let
gonna
us
have
know
that
if
by
it's
the
there.
end of this meeting for you, I guarantee it.
And/or sometimes. Okay, moving forward, let's move on. Thank you, Sandra. So it's there, the changes, it can be seen, get ready for Monday. Let's move to the draft Green Light Program bylaw.
Thank you, Worship. So there is 3 documents attached to this request. One is a memo, one is a bylaw, and one is a standard operating guideline for the Town of Vegreville Fire Department. And the topic is the Fire Services Green Light Program. The proposal is to approve the use of green flashing lights by fire services members when responding to emergency calls. This was brought up at the last legislative meeting, and the request from council was to bring forth the bylaw, draft bylaw, and the standard operating guideline that would be followed by members of the fire department. So attached is the bylaw that is outlines the use. I will just go through the short points. So any active Vegreville Fire Department member may carry on or in a vehicle other than an emergency vehicle a lamp that produces intermittent green flashes of green light and may operate the lamp in the town of Vegreville if the vehicle is proceeding to the fire station for an emergency call. No person other than an active fire department member shall operate a lamp that produces intermittent flashes of green light. Nothing in this bylaw shall be construed as to permit an active Vegreville Fire Department member to operate a vehicle in contravention of the Alberta Traffic Safety Act, the regulations under the Traffic Safety Act, or any provincial legislation or regulation, or any bylaw of the town of Vegreville. If any portion of this bylaw is declared invalid by a court of competent jurisdiction, then the invalid portion must be severed and the remainder of the bylaw deemed valid. The standard operating guideline, basically this is an administrative guideline for the department that outlines the responsibilities and the specifics. The 4 specifics in here: members who wish to operate the green flashing lights must be authorized by the fire chief. The fire department shall provide the approved flashing green lights to the authorized members of the department. Members shall not utilize green flashing lights they purchase themselves. The privilege of using the green flashing light by a member or the department as a whole may be terminated at any time by the fire chief. And again, this comes back to failure to follow these guidelines will result in an internal review and disciplinary members disciplinary measures required towards the member.
Okay, what's the budgetary impact of this we talked about?
They're $50 each per light.
Go ahead, Councilor Lemko.
Yeah, it's finally green lights on the fire department, which has been an ongoing thing for our firefighters for many, many, many years. And good on that, that we're getting that done. I reading the standard operating guideline and the use of the green light, flashing lights is, needs a little bit of work because it doesn't provide the membership of how they will use that flashlight. It just gives them approval from the officers of the department that they get it and it can be taken away, but it doesn't give a member on the department. And I know it's a standard operating guideline and how that works, but it's just doesn't have enough meat for me, and that's just me. It'll work, but it should have a little more meat to it.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we'll go to Councilor Rudick first, and then Councilor Warwa, and then Councilor Curtis. Okay, go ahead.
My question, Director Rowe, is with regards to, it's on the memo, and it just talks about the next steps in terms of approving the bylaw and ensuring that the firefighters meet the criteria and are offered the lights. We had talked about sharing it with the public because obviously Councilor Lemko has a long history and a deep affinity for the fire services, but I would suggest that most of the public would be unaware of this. So is there the intention that there would be some public sharing of the information and make sure that the public is aware?
Thank you, Councilor Rudick, and if I may. So if this will be brought forth to council for approval of the bylaw, we will send it back to the fire department. The SOG is their internal administrative SOG. And we have spoken with marketing communications manager. We will come up with a strategy before these lights are put into service. We will ensure that the public is well informed, and that includes making some signs at the entrances of our community to ensure that people know that this is a green flashing light community.
Okay, Councilor Warwa's next.
Yeah, I in general think that it's a good program, and I think the bylaw looks good. My only one point, just as more of a comment, is under the financial implications. I like that is listed the 3 funding options. I obviously am open to any of them. The only comment I would make is on number 1. If it was purchased out of the fire budget, I would want that, of course, to be an existing fire budget, not anything in reserves, and it would have to not exclude something that we had previously budgeted. But other than that, I think it's a good step.
Okay, do you have an answer, or just gonna come out of the general revenue?
General equipment budget that is budgeted annually.
Okay, Councilor Curtis, you're next.
I too just had a question regarding public awareness, so that was kind of taken care of, and just happy that this is going forward. Thank you.
Okay, let's see, do you want to make a comment, or it was taken care of?
No, thanks, Your Worship. It was just to say that, yeah, in the staff meeting here this morning, we discussed putting together an extensive community rollout of this. So, yeah, that'll be underway.
Okay, so when do you want to bring this to council?
It'll be brought
Oh,
forth on
sorry,
Monday.
Councilor Berry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can't pass up the opportunity to speak on this. I thought the format is slightly different because on most all bylaws, we end up with the first order is the short title. And this one doesn't have a short title. Normally we say this bylaw may be cited as the Green Light Program bylaw. Should that be in there? It's just, if we take the format that we do over and over and over on bylaws, we usually cite what the bylaw is to be called.
If I can, I would ask our bylaw pro, is that something that's standard to have a short title? I don't know. I realize it doesn't name that in here.
Yeah, no, it's just sort of converting. And the only other question I have is on number 2, which could become number 3 now. I'm just asking, it says no person other than an active Vegreville Fire Department member shall operate a lamp that produces intermittent flashes of green light. I would like to say while operating a vehicle, because can't I operate a green flashing light at home? Picky, I know, I'm sorry.
Not if you have 3 dogs.
Okay, let's go back to, Counselor Lemko. Which part did you said need more meat, was the responsibility of the members?
Let me get to it. The standard operating guidelines, which is an internal departmental thing. So that's for the operations of the fire department members. And it's the use of the green flashing lights, and being, my experience with fire is members will need to know exactly how that works for them. This is just allowing the fire officers to give them lights. But as a member of, so if I'm a responding member, when am I to activate, deactivate? What's the process, and what am I allowed to do while I'm doing it? And certainly that's to make it clear to a member who's now been given a green flashing light, what that means to that member. It doesn't say it in the standard operating guidelines. It may be first, but you can't discipline anybody unless you know they know.
Is that something internal or something?
That's internal. That's not, that,
Okay.
it just doesn't have, it was here, so I just
Okay,
talked on it.
CAO.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship, and Councilor Lemko. I've got a note on my action tracking sheet here to put some terms in there as to when they can be turned on, and when they should be turned off, and vice versa. Yeah.
Okay. So that one will come with a couple of changes on Monday as well, or we wanna wait and just pass one? Okay, bring it on Monday.
It's a 3-fer.
Okay, thank you, Director Rowe, I think you're done. And we're gonna move on to Director Saski.
Thank you, Your Worship.
You're welcome.
So I have a few things today. Most notable are the variance analysis report and the draft 2021 audited financials. So to start with, we're going to look at the variance analysis report, which is set up very similar to the financial statements. So I'll make some comments here and we'll go from there. So overall, the town's net debt position increased to 4.8 million from 4.2 in 2020. This is largely result of an improved cash position offset by increases in deferred revenue. Deferred revenue represents funds received in advance of expenditures being incurred. Most of the deferred revenue relates to MSI, STIP, ACP, and MSP grants. So what this means is we've have higher cash at the end of the year due to receiving grants ahead of time of us spending the expenses. So we have increased cash, but also an increased liability for the amounts that we have not yet spent. So we can't take $1.2 million of STIP funds and run away with it and not spend it on the expenses. So it's a restricted fund, and so that's why our net debt position has increased for the year. Also, just to note that net debt financial position indicates that the town does not have sufficient financial assets to repay its liabilities at December 31st, 2021. This sounds scary, but it's important to note that the long-term debt of $11.4 million is not currently all due. So scheduled repayment terms are stretching over the next 28 years in our case. So the town's current debt repayment obligation on December 31st, 2021 is $626,500. So adjusting these liabilities to reflect the current portion of long-term debt as opposed to the total long-term debt shows that the town has sufficient financial assets to satisfy current obligations. So we're in good shape. It's just overall we're in a net debt position because of our debentures that we've taken. So our total financial assets have increased of $580,000 in 2021 to $12.89 million. This is due to an increase in land held for resale due due to of the reclassification of the 75th Street properties from long-term, because they are now actively marketed for sale. So that is something to note. Our interest earned on investments and cash equivalents has totaled $95,000 in 2021. This is actually a decline from the prior year. As we know, prime has been adjusted down especially in 2020 several times. So since then, we haven't been getting as good of a return on our investments. That is something that myself and CAO Leggett will be looking into for the summer. Hopefully, now that things have leveled out a bit, we can get back into investing in something with a little better return if it's available.
Can we just stop there for a second, Director Saskew? Is there any questions on the financials up to that? Everybody's read this and there's nothing? Okay, carry on.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Please interrupt if you have anything through. So this full report is available, so I'm not gonna go through absolutely everything. I'm not gonna read it out to you. I'm just gonna go through some of the highlighted areas. So, liabilities. I was going to note that accounts payable and accrued liabilities decreased by $650,000 in the current year. This is a result of increased trade accounts payable due to ongoing capital projects at the end of 2021. So moving right along, I've already gone over deferred revenue. Long-term debt has decreased by approximately $600,000. So that means we have not taken on any additional debt for the year. We have just repaid the amounts that we had for the accruals. The chart here shows that our debt levels are decreasing. So there was a spike in 2019. That was the last debentures taken for, I believe, the RCMP building. And so since then, we've been repaying debt. We have not taken any additional debentures, draws on debentures since then. Our long-term debt and debt limit in thousands. So you can see here, the blue graph is our long-term debt that we have in each of these 5 years, and our debt limit is the orange. So the gray indicator here is what we still have remaining in debt limits. So we are doing well as a town. We're not approaching our debt limit. We have debt actually less than the remaining debt limit that we have available to us. Non-financial assets include tangible capital assets, inventories held for consumption, prepaid expenses, and non-current portion of land held for resale. So the changes this year, we're changing the non-current portion of land held for resale to current portion. So our actual net financials assets have decreased the non-financial ones. Tangible capital assets. So this is our single largest item within our non-financial assets. They have increased approximately $660,000 for the year. Some of the most significant investments in tangible capital assets in 2021 include capital works projects for overlay and concrete works on 50th Street of approximately $838,000, road reconstruction and concrete works on 45th Ave of approximately $467,000, the development costs for Prosperity Park for approximately $1.5 million, the development of walking trails for approximately $199,000, and playground projects which are still ongoing at a cost of approximately $139,000 to date. In addition, the town invested approximately $1.26 million for vehicle and equipment replacement, including the addition of the landfill compactor in 2021. So that was the most significant purchase. Amortization of TCA was approximately $3.76 million. So that is the depreciation of our assets. So the purchases and depreciation are close, so we're replacing our assets about the same as what we're using them. So that is good to look at. Other non-financial assets, a decrease of $790,000, like I said, due to reclassification of land held for development to land held for resale. So as at December 31st, 2021, accumulated surplus totaled $53.7 million, which is a decrease of $745,000 from the prior year. That we will get into when we go into our financial highlights. So overall, the town realized a decrease in unrestricted surplus of $831,000 in 2021. This is largely attributed to reallocation of $925,000 from unrestricted surplus to restricted capital reserves. So this was prudent planning on council's front, where we took unrestricted surplus and moved it to designated reserves as to what we're gonna spend those funds on. Other items were net municipal property taxes were approximately $154,000 less than budget. So this reduction was a result of council's decision to reduce property taxes by 2% in 2021, and also subsequent reductions to property tax assessment after the tax assessments were mailed out. Rental income is also approximately $253,000 less than budget. This is a result of continued gathering restrictions, which resulted in 2021 rentals of our town-owned properties not being what they were expected, also countered by expenses not as great as what was expected. So that ended up netting out quite a bit. Salary and wages were a little bit lower than budget, and then contracted in general services declined by $389,000, also a result of the pandemic. So overall, operations came in below budget for 2021. Items over budget were brought to council. Such items were crosswalks and sewer main overages for the Capital Works project, which we brought out of capital reserve. Southeast 17 tendering came in over budget, so that was also brought to council for approval. And the RCMP retro pay and in-year pay raise had to come out of reserves because that was something that was not budgeted, as we did not foresee it ahead of time. So that will continue through.
That's just on paper though, correct, on the retro pay?
Yes, so the retro pay, just to be clear, we have not paid the in-year pay raise or the retro pay, so that was actually $289,000. But because we've actually been, so to say, not necessarily invoiced, it's been shown to us, it is a liability of the town right now, so it's on our books for December 31st, 2021. So we've accrued it, and we've taken that amount out of our reserves as per council resolution, but we have not actually physically paid that too at that point in time. We haven't actually been invoiced for the retro pay or the in-year pay raise at this time, but it's accrued for 2021. Just some other areas of revenue versus expense analysis. General government services, operation revenues came in $57,000 over budget. We had refunds for rebates on our WCB and software programs. Expenditures were under budget by 107, and this was made up of wages under budget due to vacant positions part of the year, as well as mileage, meals, conference fees under budget due to lack of in-person conferences and meetings in 2021. So that was throughout all departments, so to say. What else? Public Works. So net operating costs for Public Works were approximately $434,000 below budget. Wages and benefits were 76 below budget due to unfilled positions throughout 2021. Cost of operating streetlights declined by $43,000 because of lower electricity costs in 2021. Capital Works projects undertaken in 2021 included all those, the overlays and the concrete works. So budgeted costs for all these projects were $1.05 million and actual were $1.3 million. So of that, $723,000 was funded by our MSI grant, $326,500 by our federal gas tax grant, and then $255,000 transfer from reserves for the remainder. So the town used 100% of its 2021 MSI allocation for total proceeds of $1.532 million. Combined with MSI funds carried forward from 2020, less the cost of capital works projects, the town now has $1.96 million in MSI funds carried forward to apply to capital works projects in 2022. And then in addition, the town did not need to utilize the full amount of its FGTF grant, and it's carrying forward $406,382 into 2022 to apply for capital projects. So that is all I have, and some of the high
Does anybody
points.
have any questions right now? Okay, I figured, so we'll go
Yeah.
to Councillor Rudy.
I was gonna say, there's a lot here, so.
Sorry, and I wasn't sure where I should ask this question. So when we've done the variance reports over the last, I guess, 2 years, and you've highlighted a couple areas where we've had, for example, a decrease in rental and a surplus in some areas for staff. For COVID-related, pandemic-related costs, are we still keeping that separate? So when we are finally finished and we can actually do some accounting, will we be able to put all of that together in a separate final report or some way to be able to capture that?
Yes, for the most part, there was actually I believe it was the MSP grant, if I remember the acronyms correctly, covering COVID expenses. So we do have a summary spreadsheet of all of that. And basically, since my time coming back from leave last year, most of our areas were open and, so to say, not being tracked since then. But before then, definitely with the shutdowns of the pool and recreation facilities and a lot of the rep program things, we do still have a tracking of those costs. And the MSP grant was submitted to curtain some of those costs as well. So yes, we do have that.
So I have a question for Dale, and we all know it didn't snow very much last year, and I think that is very obvious in the Public Works, what's there is below budget, and I would imagine this winter, we're probably gonna use that up with what the operations we've seen up till now.
You're absolutely correct, Your Worship. For example, if you just want to talk diesel fuel just for a minute, last year, between January and March of 2021, we used 26,600 liters of diesel at a total cost of $26,500. Now, remember, last year was a lighter snow year, so we got away with it. It was good for us. This year, from the same time period, January till end of March, we burned 56,500 liters and charged out about 77,800 in just diesel, not gasoline, just diesel. So that's $52,000 increase from last year just in diesel, and that's not edgings, wear blades, parts, oil changes, all the things that go with running equipment hard, so.
Overtime. Yeah. So, I mean, when people look at this financial overlay and how we performed last year, everybody has to take that into account, that we put this money into Public Works, and some years we'll break even on it, and some years we'll do better than others, like last year, but this year, we're probably gonna have a bigger problem than what this actually, this was, so. Just so people don't think that they're paying a bunch of money up front that we don't really need the tax on, because it all seems to even out.
Yeah, for sure, especially with things that are really largely dependent on weather. We can't predict weather, so lots of the times with Dale's department, we use, so to say, a 5-year average, and that's where it's budgeted. So, a lot of the time, if we do have over budgeted, what we'll do is we'll transfer that into our carry forward reserve. We've been very prudent with that recently, where we'll transfer it into a carry forward reserve if there is a surplus in one specific spot, and then bring it in for the next year's budget. So what was over budgeted in the prior year then is reducing what is being budgeted for the next year. So we have been doing that.
I'm a little surprised at the carry forward on the MSI. It's a little higher than I thought it was gonna be, that we're bringing forward, about $200,000, I think, than what we were expecting, so. Obviously, we were prudent with the money, or someone forgot to bill us, or what?
We do have ongoing projects too, so lots of
Yeah.
the times we'll budget, and like, for example, Southeast 17, Prosperity Park, we have been having delays due to sourcing supplies and whatnot. So something that was budgeted for 2021 as a cost might have creeped its way and rolled into 2022. So that all gets taken into account.
Okay, is there any other questions on what Director Saski has read up to now? Okay. There we are.
So then there's 2 circle charts, and it shows revenues by functional area. So you can see that significant portion of our revenues are net municipal taxes, and the other 48% is funded through other items such as utilities, general government, recreation, etc. So that is where that is, and same thing with expenditures. You can see that expenditures are more grossly laid out across all departments, and that is that. So financial operations by object, so this is just revenues and expenditures presented a different way. So instead of looking at each department, it's looking at property taxes, user fees, government transfers, franchise fees, other revenues, and then government transfers for capital. The most significant one to note is actually government transfers for capital. We're approximately 1.96 million lower than budget, and 847,000 higher than the revenues that we had in 2020. So the decrease over budget is largely due to the timing and recognition of grant funds with the costs associated with various capital projects, specifically timing of work done on Southeast 17 and the related ISIP grant funding. So we were expecting to have had more grant funding from ISIP and MSI, et cetera, for Southeast 17, but due to project delays and funding, we can only recognize the funding that we've spent. So the remainder of it is in deferred revenue for what has been received. And then, for example, ISIP, we do the monthly claims, so we don't get the funding until we put in a claim. So that is the reason for the decrease there. So it's hard because the financials sometimes skew you to say, oh, we didn't spend as much or we didn't get as much as we planned. But really, the ISIP grant is, so to say, a refundable grant. They don't give us the funds until we spend the money. So, any questions with any of that?
I like your term for pie charts. You call them circle charts. Nice.
Circle charts.
Sounds a lot more grown up.
Circle charts. I don't know. That might be just my term. So
No, that's fine.
Don't quote me on it.
I like circle charts.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so revenues by source. So you can see net municipal taxes are 46% when we look at the revenues by source. And that is the difference between that and the chart from before is because this one is not showing, this is operating revenues only, not including capital. So the user fees, operating grants, capital, oh, the capital grants are in here. That's why it's different, is because capital grants are in here. So, as you can see, investment income is a very, it's not quite 0%, but due to rounding, it says it's 0% here. So it is important for us to be sourcing the best funds and grant that we can for our investment purposes, but in the end, it is a very small portion of the actual revenue that our municipality receives. So expenses by object decreased approximately $490,000 from budget and increased $1.2 million from the prior year. So we were under budget, but also spent more than the prior year. Contributing factors to the decline were reduced costs resulting from the pandemic, as well as the Southeast 17 spending. So, continue through. Expenses by type in this next circle chart. You can see salaries and wages, benefits 38%, amortization expense 18%, goods purchased 17%, contracted services 18%, and then the remainder are scattered throughout or minimum amounts. So any questions about the expenditures by object?
Just if you want to explain the amortization expense.
Okay, yeah, that actually came. So amortization expense is something that we, as a municipality, do not levy taxpayers for. So our operating budget does not include amortization. We try that to be 0 or like a small surplus. Amortization has to be in our expenditures for purposes of financial statements. So we don't levy the taxpayers, like our amortization was about 3.7 million. We don't levy for amortization, but it is still an expense that is accrued for financial purposes. So that is something like that. When we say that's an expense, we're not actually collecting tax revenue for that amount. So on cash flows, our cash and cash equivalents declined by 419,000 to 6.65 million in 2021. Investments remained unchanged because we redeemed all of our investments for cash, as our investments that we were getting for short term, the rates that they were giving us were actually less than BMO was willing to give us in our treasury account. So we have 0 investments as in GICs, other investment certificates at this point in time. The decrease of 419,000 of cash in the year, and that is due to operating activities for cash provided, 4.6 million, and 4.4 million was used for acquisition of tangible capital assets. And so that is a reflection of the town's commitment to the maintenance and improvement of capital infrastructure and facilities. So for benchmarking, a town or municipality needs to be looking at the rate of amortization of their assets compared to what they're replacing them with. So our amortization was 3.8 million in the year. So we actually replaced more than we amortized. So we actually had a net surplus of capital this year. And what you would see is if the municipality is not investing into capital at the same rate that we're amortizing it, that's when you start to see that roads are deteriorating and the council doesn't able to replace them, et cetera. So it is good to see financial health of the municipality replacing assets at the same rate that we're declining them.
Actually, we're a little on the other side.
Yeah, well, we're working to get to be where we are. But this year, we replaced more than we amortized. So next on this list is property taxes. So you can see the assessment history 2020 to 2016, or 2021 to 2016, sorry. I didn't update that heading. It should be 2021 to 2017. So you can see that our town's assessment has been slowly declining since 2019. So this is, this teamed up with town reducing property taxes, the 2%, we're collecting less tax revenue than we have even in 2019, 2018, 2017. So the overall taxable assessment has declined from a high of $774 million in 2019 down to $702 million in 2021. So that's a decline of 9.3% over the last 3 years. Residential assessment makes up 66.5% of the taxable assessment in 2021 compared to 71.5% in 2017. So our residential assessments have seen a drastic decline as well. The total value of residential assessment has declined by $773,000, so 14.2% in the last 5 years. So that's the assessment that we get from our assessor rate. Obviously we haven't been getting any kind of assessment growth in the last 5 years. Non-residential assessment, including grants in place of taxes, makes up 33.5% of taxable assessment compared to 28.6% in 2017. The total value of non-residential assessment has grown by 1.08% in the last 5 years. So we have been seeing some additional businesses coming to town, and that's where the additional non-residential builds, that's been contributing to the increase in non-residential. Obviously our residential, we haven't had a lot of residential builds in the last 5 years.
So, without talking to Ray, I think we can assume that our assessment on the residential will stay pretty much where it is. The increase in housing costs in the community will probably show up next year in higher assessment.
Yes, because Ray's assessment is always a few months behind, and we did get the most recent assessment, and I believe it was stable from the prior year, possibly up slightly. Don't quote me on that, but it was stable from the prior year. It didn't see a decline again. So that'll be coming up in my tax rate bylaw in a couple weeks.
Well, I'd just like to stop here and for anybody that's watching it and take a look at this. What we've been collecting has been going down the last couple of years. Our assessment has dropped off at 14.2%. We've given tax breaks to residential at 2%, and small businesses under 50 employees, we've given them 20%. Up to 20% tax break. And that's all a credit to the staff and council of this town finding ways to operate less money, but still hold the service level of what everybody's accustomed to, and still be prudent in the infrastructure upgrades that we do, that we're still ahead of the other side where we're writing off. So, I mean, that in itself is the way to operate. I mean, we got to take a lot of credit in that we were able to do that during some tough times. So, just want everybody to understand that. I mean, we can't hold taxes and take them back forever, but we've done a really good job over the last couple of years, so.
Yes, that is correct. So statistical information, I have a few financial indicators, and then we're coming to the end of this report. I'm sorry, financial stuff is so thrilling. It's important.
Certainly is, especially if you're new to council and then understanding how it works. And I mean, it's a little more than balancing your checkbook at home.
Yes. And I notice I have another typo here. I apologize. So this is on the headings. It should be 2021 is the gray, highlighted gray column, not 2020 twice. So our financial assets to liabilities in 2021 is 0.73, slight decrease from 0.75 in 2020. Total expenditures to assessment, 2.48%, so that's an increase from 2020 of 2.16. I will remember, we do have to remember that 2020 was a light year in spending and revenues due to the pandemic. There was many facilities and items closed. Debt charges to revenue, 5.1% compared to 5.3 the prior year. And government transfers to total revenue, 23.3 compared to 17.3 in 2020. Like I said, the 23.3 is very comparable to 2019, 18, and 17. 2020 is going to be just a one-off year due to the pandemic. So sustainability indicators indicate the degree to which the town can maintain its existing services and financial commitments without increasing debt or the tax burden to its citizens. So the financial asset to liabilities decreasing to 0.73 from 0.75. This ratio indicates that as of December 31st, 2021, the town had 73 cents in financial assets for every $1 in liabilities. So the total expenses to assessment compares the economic activity to the town using assessments to total expenses for the organization. The increase in town expenses should not outpace increase in the assessments. So the town's ratio has not changed significantly over the past 5 years. This ratio will rise in periods of economic slowdown as expenses are subject to inflation and assessments decline. So hopefully we can see that trend the other way in a great economic recovery.
Well, just where we're at with inflation in this country right now, there's no way that this municipality is not gonna be affected.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all, it doesn't matter what you do, you know, your house at home or you're running this operation here, we're all gonna be affected by the inflation side of it, so.
And not to mention, we're affected by weather, so even just the fuel costs that we've increased our fuel consumption due to the amount of snowfall we've had in 2021 to date. Plus, we all know that fuel costs are slightly higher than they were in the prior years. So like, we're not immune to any of those risks, so. The flexibility indicator, so that's the debt charges to revenues. It indicates the measure to the degree to which the town uses debt instead of increased taxation to meet its capital commitments. So in 2021, the town committed 5.1% of revenue to service debt, which is down from 2020. So obviously that is down because we haven't taken on any additional debentures. So total long-term borrowing has decreased by the amount of the repayments that we've had in the year. So in relation to long-term debt, over the last 5 years, long-term debt has increased from 8 million in 2017 to 11.4 million in 2021. So that increase is largely due to the RCMP detachment. And the increased debt since 2015 also serviced the North Parkway drainage project, and then the construction of the new RCMP and the purchase of new fire rescue equipment. So those were the 3 big purchases we've had since then. Vulnerability indicators, so those are continued decline in government transfers up until 2021. So that is why our amounts have been going down and then spiked up again because we received 1.4 million in government transfers due to the ISIP grant in the current year. So.
And where does this reflect the loading upfront of the MSI? Because that was 2 years ago that they loaded it up and now they've taken it away from us.
Well, and see, that's hard to capture here because the MSI loading, unless we've spent it. So it's not, if it's received but not spent, it's in deferred.
Okay,
so
yeah.
this is the actual revenue that has been realized, which is actually based on our projects.
Yeah, okay,
So
so the
because
other
when
still
we got loaded, we were prudent and
we deferred
carried
it.
forward. Yeah, so that isn't reflected here because that revenue, if we spent it in the year that we got it paid up front, then we would have seen a percentage decrease or increase. But because we were prudent and we put it into deferreds, then it's not reflected here.
Okay.
And then the last circle graph is where tax dollars are spent. Is there any questions like, I know this is a very long report, so.
No, that's fine. Tax dollars are spent, where is the legislative, like, on council? It must be very small.
It's very small. Well, I believe council is, it's in with general government services. So it's legislation, corporate services, not community service, communications and marketing, and I believe economic development is all in there. So that's where that is. And then the audited financial statements are available to the next discussion.
Okay, so that report is done. Now we wanna move on to the audited statement? Okay, well, first of all, very good job on that.
Thank you.
It was very thorough, and it highlighted, the stuff that needed to be highlighted. I really felt that, I mean, you don't have to have a degree in economics or in accounting to understand where we're going and where we're heading in this, this organization, so, for that, I thank you.
You're welcome. So the audited financials, I don't know how in-depth you want me to go through these. We've had them all attached. And like I said, the audited financials were the premise of how I prepared the variance analysis report. So financial assets, liabilities, net debt, we have discussed that already. Consolidated statement of operations, I went into the variance of those. So if you note the deficiency of revenue of over expenditures before other. So for 2021, budget amount was a 3.4 million deficit on page 3, and actual was 2.9 million deficit. So that is $502,000 below budget. So just from operations, we came in below budget last year, but that's before we bring in the capital transfers. So, like I said, it's really hard to determine just from one statement of operations, the budget versus actual, and if we're overspending or underspending. It's just based on how the numbers come together. So it looks like we're below budget, but then if you bring in the surplus or deficiency of revenues over expenditures, we're actually at 744 for the end of the year.
So, when the auditor was done, what did they draw your attention to?
They haven't done that yet because they will be doing they haven't given me the draft MD&A yet, so.
Do you want me to tell you what they told me?
Oh, yeah, please.
They didn't tell me anything.
Yeah, so I actually
Usually
haven't-
they do, they'll bug me in for a conversation,
Yes.
if there's any problems and stuff, and then, but up to now, it's been very good.
Yeah, so I don't have any comments on them on anything they want to change so far, so that has been good, and they will be here on the 11th to make like their official presentation, but we like to go over the drafts ahead of time so that this gives council, I guess we do have 2 new councilors, so this gives council the opportunity to ask some questions ahead of time. So statement of operations, if there's no questions on that, I will continue through.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So statement of changes in net debt. So as I've noted before, our net debt amount has increased, but that is due to explainable items. And we don't have that full obligation right now, so the town is in a position to fulfill its debt requirements. Statement of cash flows is on page 5. One thing to note, 2020, we had a decrease in investments, and we have no change in investments in 2021. Like I said, the financial ability of terms and GICs were not great last year, so we actually earned better interest in our BMO bank account than we did in an investment. So that is why we have no investments. There's any questions on that page?
I would imagine that, the BMO is the bank, we have a contract services with right now. That pretty soon they will be, looking at a new strategy for our investments, I would think.
Yes, so last year we had an RFP for banking services, and so BMO was our previous banker, and they were the ones that were successful in renegotiating. And we have our banker, and he has been sending me, there has been some movement in term certificates and whatnot, so there are possibly some opportunities to get some better investments in the coming weeks and months, so. It's top of mind at all times, so. Schedule of changes in accumulated surplus is on page 6. So one thing to note is the reallocation of restricted capital reserve. So we took $925,000 out of unrestricted surplus and $32,000 out of restricted operating reserves and transferred that to restricted capital reserve. So that is something that council did in this prior year. So we're looking towards the future, making sure that we can fund capital purchases. So that is good to see, like I spoke to before with amortization and replacement of capital. That is something that's at the forefront of ensuring that a municipality is able to replace its assets. So moving on to Schedule 2 is our schedule of tangible capital assets. So we had in the year, the additions were 4.4 million and amortization was 3.7 million. So we're in a positive trend. So we opened with 57 million of assets and closed with 58 million. So our net assets increased in the year. So that was good to see. Schedule 3 is the schedule of property and other taxes. So this is something to note. So you can see in 2020, we had $10 million of real property taxes collected. Budget for 2021 was 9.9 million of real property taxes and actual collected was 9.5. So this is a result of the 2% tax decrease plus an additional hit due to reduced assessment. So that is why our tax revenue is lower than budgeted and lower than the prior year. So it's a significant difference from 2020. So kudos to staff and council and directors for operating an effective services as we did in the prior year. Another thing to note, Minburn Seniors Foundation. So our budget was significantly lower than the actual requisition because they adjusted their requisition in the prior year to reflect their costs too. So they've requisitioned us more due to, oh my goodness, cost of living adjustments and like the actual cost of funding their programs. So once again, that's another hit that we took that we weren't necessarily anticipating, but it's understandable. Like the cost of things are just going up and up and up. So net municipal taxes were 9 million for the year. Budget was 9.1 million and actual from 2020 was 9.3. So we operated services with less in 2021. Any questions for that?
Go
Yes.
ahead.
So the line item that is designated industrial properties, will that be changing in the upcoming year likely?
So that is the designated industrial properties includes linear now too, and that is assessed by the province. So our assessor no longer assesses any kind of the industrial properties or any of the linear, the cable, telecommunications, etc. So that is something that we get from the province. So we will see where that goes once I don't think there was a significant change. I was looking at the assessment this last week, but I will let you know once we get it all in place. Okay, so Schedule 4 is on page 9, so you can see our government transfers. Item to note is the federal government transfers for capital. We had budgeted the ISIP grant under a federal grant, but it actually comes from Her Majesty the Queen. So the provincial amount is over budget, and that is due to the ISIP funding received in 2021. And as I had noted, we had budgeted higher ISIP grant than what we actually received because of delays in progress of construction. So that's the only difference there, was largely due to the ISIP. Like I said, refundable grant, so unless we spent the money, we didn't actually receive the grant. So expenses by object, Schedule 5, I had gone through that already. Schedule 6 is segmented disclosure, which is once again revenues and expenditures detailed in a more detailed way. Is there any questions on this page?
Seeing nobody, keep going.
Okay, and then after that, page 12 onwards is the notes to the financial statements. So this is just for financial presentation. The CPA handbook requires that we have all these notes, and it goes over in detail the financial treatment of each of the balance sheet and income statement items as detailed in each of these notes. So I don't know that I have anything that I want to bring to light. Specifically, the debt limits we talked about in my variance analysis. And then the rest of it is, unless there's questions.
Well, is anybody else? We're good.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then there is the reserve schedule attached.
Yep.
The one thing I did want to note is that this schedule that I've attached also includes any reserves that have been set aside for upcoming items. So for example, on the infrastructure reserve, we had committed the 1.2 million, that was the overage on the Southeast 17 development from tender base versus budget. So there's still $946,000 committed moving into 2022 to fund those costs. So that is reflected in this $668,000 balance here. That is overstated compared to what's on December 31st, 2021, because on the financials is only what we've spent so far. So this is reflective of everything that you've committed. So this is what we have left to commit from our reserves at December 31st.
And when will we be seeing some recommendations to top up reserves in the future? Like, when will we have that conversation?
I would say we could have that anytime. I do have to go through reserves. Once the audit is done, I'll roll them forward, and then we've already committed items to reserves for this year. So in the 2022 budget, there's certain items that have been spent out of reserves as well as putting into the reserves. So like the fire reserve, for example, the 80,000, that has to be added to this reserve schedule for 2022.
But we'll be putting some money back into reserves because of some of the savings we had last year. And we'll have to identify where they're going
And that was done through the carry forward reserve transfers. We did that in the fall.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then we'll talk about any additions to reserve in the budget process as well as carry forward reserves at the end of this year. But if there is something where council wants to look and add items to reserve or move reserves, we can have that discussion too.
Okay, I think that it's worthwhile to have that discussion before the summer, before we get into the summer.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's what I was thinking, after tax bylaw and then,
yep. Okay, is that all for you?
that is all for me.
Well, thank you very much, very well done.
Thank you.
Now, at this time, we've been at this for a couple hours, does anybody want to take a bio break? So if we could, we'll ask for a 10-minute break, and then we'll get back into the agenda.